The 22nd century, the age of imperialism. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine highlights where power lies in the 21st century. Now, George Orwell said that in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And I'm going to attempt to look at the historical background behind that particular conflict, and then look at the situation worldwide, and then explain why I think that this conflict should never have occurred. Now, an imperial power is a power that dominates foreign nation states. And the history of the World War I was an imperialist war, but we believed that the time for imperialism was behind us. But the fact is, we are in an age of imperialism. And the way we need to look at this is to look at the reach of particular nation states beyond their national boundary. And that's the key, beyond their national boundaries. Theoretically, we have about 210 sovereign nation states, some a few kilometres, square kilometres, others covering vast sections of planet Earth. And the dominant imperialist power currently is the United States of America. If we look at the number of military bases beyond the United States boundaries, the United States has somewhere between 750 to 800 military bases in over 70 so-called independent nation states to maintain its imperial position, to maintain its cultural and, more importantly, its economic dominance around the world. And those people who think the United States is a spent military and cultural power need to think again. Irrespective of the internal divisions within the United States of America, it continues to cast a major shadow over activities, political, social and cultural activities around the world through the establishment of 750 to 800 military bases around the world in over 70 countries. When we look at the two emerging imperialist powers, I should say an imperialist power that wants to regain its former dominance, the Russia. Russia has 21 foreign military bases outside its national borders. That's 21 compared with 800 for the United States. When you look at China, an emerging imperialist power, it has only one military base in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. Only one in comparison to the United States 800 and Russia's 21. When you look at the way where these military bases are established, you begin to understand the paranoia which grips the authoritarian leadership within the Chinese Communist Party and Russia, the current Russian government under Vladimir Putin. The United States has over 250 military bases surrounding China. And when you factor in the NATO alliance, it's over 100 military bases surrounding Russia. So let's look at the current disgusting invasion and the reasons behind it. Because if you want to understand something, we need to look at the reasons. History didn't start yesterday. History started a long time ago. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the two dominant imperialist powers in the world, the Soviet Union and the United States, were on the brink of nuclear war when Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, placed nuclear-armed missiles in Cuba. At the same time, the United States had nuclear-armed missiles directed at Russia in Turkey. Now, Khrushchev and Kennedy, understanding that the human race was on the brink of a major catastrophe, both made allowances. Both gave way. The United States removed its nuclear-capped missiles from Turkey, and the Soviet Union removed its nuclear-capped missiles from Cuba, averting a nuclear war. Both sides decided that the price to be paid by humanity for their imperialist ambitions were not worth the cost. That's in 1962, at the height of the Cold War, when we had these two imperial powers facing off in South America, in Africa, in Asia, where they used other people's lives in order to expand their ambitions. Now, when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, the Warsaw Pact disintegrated. The Warsaw Pact was an alliance between East European nation states, which were under the domination of the Soviet Union, and Russia, to meet the combined might of the United States alliance and NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's NATO. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Russians were given an undertaking that NATO would not expand into the East European theatre of war. But over the last 30 years, NATO has continued to expand, although there is no Warsaw Pact. It's expanded into Eastern Europe, into every country in Eastern Europe. It's expanded into countries on the border of the Soviet Union. Ukraine became a bargaining chip. The 40 million new people in Ukraine became a bargaining chip between the West, dominated by the United States, and Russia, dominated by a totalitarian regime, although elected, which has continued to centralise power in the hands of one man, Vladimir Putin. And both Biden and Putin came to the decision that the carnage which would occur in Ukraine was an acceptable price to pay to ensure the status quo remained. They have both agreed that Ukraine is in the United States sphere, is in the Russian sphere of influence. That's why they haven't put troops there, or NATO has placed troops in the Ukraine. The United States has known for years of Russia's ambitions to colonise the Ukraine and incorporate it into its sphere of influence. It has known this for years, and it had every detail of the Russian invasion at its fingertips. The United States President and Cabinet decided not to negotiate on the question of the Ukraine joining NATO. That was their decision. Unlike Kennedy and Khrushchev, who negotiated and come to some type of agreement which suited both sides, where both sides stepped away from the brink of a universal catastrophe, both sides in this conflict decided that they would not back down. And the people of the Ukraine, and the dislocation which is occurring in the Ukraine today, and the death and destruction of a sovereign nation state, can be laid at the feet of both imperialist powers. One imperialist power has invaded the Ukraine. The other imperialist power refused to negotiate in order to stop an invasion of Ukraine. And that negotiation would have centred around the Ukraine not being incorporated into the National Alliance Treaty Organisation, because once the Ukraine was incorporated in the National Alliance, the Russia would have been surrounded, totally surrounded physically by NATO. So that's the background. This in no way is an apology for Russia's invasion, but it highlights how important negotiations are, and it highlighted how the United States and the West factored into their thinking that the people of the Ukraine and the destruction of the Ukraine as an independent nation state was a disposable entity, was a price to pay to contain Russian imperialist ambitions. At the same time, in Australia, although we are over 10,000 kilometres from the Ukraine, we need to understand that the same theatre, the same play is happening in our region, with the China looking to extend beyond its national boundaries, and for a significant reason, because the Chinese government and the Chinese people are surrounded by United States bases, and it's very easy to see how such a conflict could erupt in our region. But the problem is, we do not have an independent foreign policy. Our foreign policy as a nation state is directly attached to the United States foreign policy. And let's not forget that the United States has been involved in a number of invasions in the 21st century. A number of invasions. So imperialism is not just a 22nd century reality, it's also a 21st century reality. And the 21st century will turn out to be the period when imperialist forces when military imperialist nationalist powers use their increased military capabilities to extend their spheres of influence, not just economically, as we see today in the 21st century, when the economic system is dominated by the private investment for private profit brigade, who don't care what happens, irrespective of the harm to the environment, to people. The 21st century has seen cultural domination of planet Earth through the World Wide Web, and we are seeing economic domination through the United States and Chinese foray into the world. So will the 21st century be the century not just of a climate emergency, but will the 21st century be the century when one imperial power dominates every sovereign nation state on this planet? And what we are seeing with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine is the beginning of the physical domination of states by nation states that have imperial ambitions. We saw it in the 19th century when colonial authorities extended their hold on the world with gunships and disease. We are seeing it in the 21st century when we see states go beyond their borders in their desire to control the planet. So it's not the United Nations you need to be worried about. A lot of people talk about one world government. That's garbage. One world government will come from imperial domination. The United States currently is the main imperial power with over 800 military bases in 70 sovereign nation states around the world. The Russian Empire is beginning to break out of its containment, while the Chinese Empire is waiting and seeing in which direction the wind blows. Ultimately, the 21st century, as we move towards the 22nd century, will be a century where we see increasing centralisation of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And that's why the struggle for economic freedom, freedom of the individual, and the freedom to determine our lives free of what's happening in other nation state is paramount. There is one shining example in this morass of in which direction things may move. The autonomous administration in north and eastern Syria is an attempt by Kurds and Arabs in an area, a small area which incorporates over 5 million people, to create an administration that is not based on sovereign nation state concepts, an administration which is based on satisfying the real, not manufactured needs of the people in a particular geographical region. So the 21st century will be the century where it will be determined whether human beings are willing to be used as pawns to further the imperial ambitions of leaders and rulers, in particular nation states who believe they have the power to expand irrespective. Or will it be the 21st century? Will it be the era when the common human being, the men, women and children on this planet, move in a different direction? While we continue to obey their orders, while we continue to be sacrificed on the altar of nationalism, while we continue to be divided because of our differences, we will continue to be nothing more than cannon fodder, which has disposable human beings in a war that will see one imperial power dominate life, or what's left of life on this planet, as we move towards the 22nd century.